I... I didn't know what I was doing. If I had realized that this was the price of freedom, I wouldn't have paid.
Are we willing to pay the price of liberty, even if it costs our lives and ourselves? What is it that we fight for exactly? Is it hope, fear, maybe something else entirely? All over the world, we see various insurgencies, various rebellions, various forms of civil strife and war, and yet, in a great piece of irony, it only continues the cycle of history. One power may take the place of another, only for another to take its place afterwards. The Chinese have discussed this idea in their concept of the mandate of heaven, and other great thinkers and historians, such as Ibn Khaldun, have discussed this as the rise and fall of empires. There have been conflicts ongoing and recent that have inflicted the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people collectively. We see in Sudan, in Mali, in Somalia, in the Congo, and many more across the African continent, for example, these civil wars, these conflicts taking place. Even recently, for example, we had the Ethiopian civil war, which claimed the lives of millions even. We see the Myanmar civil war, which has reached a stalemate as of now. And another example is that of Nepal, where there was a successful Gen Z revolution against their government. Across the world, whether it be Russia and Ukraine, whether it be the ongoing or as of now, where negotiations have been reached between Iran, Lebanon, and the United States and Israel, whether it be in the form of Pakistan and Afghanistan or even Pakistan and India quite recently. Besides these conflicts, there have been protests and historical riots across the world that have shaken multiple nations, the United States and the broader Western world, China, even my home country Pakistan, etc., etc. After having averted much conflict, quote unquote, for the past 80 years or so, the world may fall back into a new age of conflict. In fact, and as a matter of reality, arguably this era of peace, quote unquote, was always an illusion, a rather Eurocentric view based within the mythology of the world wars. The wars that have occurred in Africa that have been disastrous in their consequences for the continent and have claimed the lives of millions of people serves as an example to easily disprove this point. Not just in Africa, but certain broader Eurasian, including Asia and even Europe itself, and certain conflicts within Latin America as well, including examples of outright genocide and war crimes, serve to easily disprove this point. What is worse, even if there are increasing strides to supposed standards of war and laws of war, the nature of modern technology has increased the scale of these crimes as well. This is important as some of the liberal and progressive mythologies of our day may present a gradual decrease in violence over time. For example, Steven Pinker in his work The Better Angels of Our Nature makes this argument, but it can very easily be critiqued based on the above points. This is not to mention other forms of oppression and tyranny. For example, the rise in government censorship and surveillance across the world, whether it be within the broader Western bloc, such as in the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, etc., whether it be in China, Russia, or Iran, whether it be in countries like India and Pakistan, or in countries such as Israel or Saudi Arabia. We have seen how multiple riots have occurred across much of the world and have fundamentally shaken the foundations of various countries and various regimes, and how their implications have been historical. For example, we have seen the Arab Spring in the Arab Muslim world and how the effects of that can still be seen today. In the Western world, we see the BLM riots or the reactionary right-wing riots that are currently going on and how they are influencing the politics of the day. Thus, as we enter into a new multipolar era, with a decline of relative American hegemonic power over the rest of the world, we see that we are perhaps entering upon a new age of conflict, an era that is defined very much by different parts of the world being in fundamental conflict and in fundamental wars with one another, but also between the various inhabitants and members of those parts of the world. But between the lines of these broader geopolitical tendencies and trends, of the struggles of nations, of the struggles of various peoples, there is a deeper and more fundamental human element, the suffering of individuals, the suffering of collectives, the oppression of certain groups, but most of all, the longing for freedom and the longing for liberty in the face of said oppression. A very important example of this struggle for liberation has been the struggle for Palestine over the past 100 or so years. It is not merely that the Palestinian issue is at the heart of one specific set of issues, but so many different yet intersecting ones. There is the colonialism versus anti-colonialism divide, the divide of the different civilizations of the world, including what we could term the Arab or Islamic world versus or against this essentially Western proxy state, the East versus the West, etc. There are many more divides that we can consider here that intersect with these different issues, such as unipolarity versus multipolarity, or the logic of empire versus the logic of nation. Whether or not you agree with these classifications, they have latched onto this conflict. I would recommend Ilan Pappé's works on Palestine, such as his works The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, A Very Short History of the Israel-Palestine Conflict, and 10 Myths About Israel, which are essential works for anybody who wants to understand this issue. Of course, we know of the typical narratives that surround this issue. The mass immigration of European Jewish refugees fleeing persecution into the Holy Land was an event which led to the creation of a state for the Jewish peoples, quote unquote, in the Holy Land. The idea of people en masse moving anywhere interchangeably is fundamentally a product of the logic of empire, not of nation, and this is indeed what happened to transpire and play out. Whilst initially this was of course a noble cause in helping a persecuted group flee oppression, and the fact remained that the Jewish people had a right to national self-determination, this ended up being expressed not merely as such, but as a settler colonial project predicated on displacing, aka ethnic cleansing, the native Palestinians from the land. What may have begun with noble intentions inevitably paved the path to hell, for the Palestinians didn't get a say, They did not get a right to national self-determination. They did not get a say in deciding the fate of their land. The Nakhba, which occurred, led to 800,000 Palestinians being uprooted, 531 villages being destroyed, 11 urban neighborhoods emptied of inhabitants. The Palestinians have had countless 9/11 or October 7th events for them over the span of 75 years, and the Gaza genocide from 2023 just further serves to prove this point. The settlements on the West Bank continue, and cities such as Rafah have been leveled to the ground. Perhaps this may be a particular narrative, but then again, don't all of these various nations do the same? Doesn't Israel? Doesn't the United States? Don't other nations do the same as well? In particular, when it comes to Israel, they may decontextualize the actions of the Palestinians and serve to downplay or belittle their suffering, but everything that they do has to be justified, and if you don't justify it, then you are supposedly hating a whole group of people and engaging in anti-Semitism. Thus, Israel and Zionists weaponize anti-Semitism, and they weaponize the narratives that they derive from the Holocaust in order to justify their oppression of the Palestinian people. Indeed, innocent life lost, whether Israeli or Palestinian, is indeed unspeakable tragedy, is indeed a unspeakable tragedy that can't be downplayed or undermined. But the least that can be said is that the Israelis would have a home to return to, that the integrity of their state, the integrity of their national self-determination will remain. But for the Palestinians, they may lose their loved ones, their way of life, but most importantly, they may not have a home to return to, as they are forcibly kicked off and forced to flee from their native land. Sure, the Arabs and the Muslims aren't exactly perfect, and they have plenty of blood on their hands as well. By no accounts are the Palestinians completely innocent. But after all, nobody can disprove that the devil doesn't really run in their blood. And if we are going by account of how much blood is on whose hands, the Israeli genocidal state certainly has plenty more blood on its hands than the Palestinians would have. In truth, this is nothing against your everyday normal Israelis. I don't wish for war, death, or destruction indeed upon anyone. But unfortunately, the cycle of hatred will inevitably continue indefinitely, for as long as there are two people left on this earth, they will continue to fight over one thing or another, over ideology, over ethnicity, over religion, over territory, over resources. And in the case of the Palestinians, well, they are literally being deprived of their rights, their right to their land, their right to preserve their way of life, their right not to be genocided, their right to determine their own destiny, and their right not to be oppressed by a cruel regime. Nor do I want to downplay or deny the historic suffering of the Jewish people, or engage in the narratives of rising popularity that do so. Yet, the Jewish people, of all people, themselves should know only too well the crime of collectively guilting and punishing a whole group of people based on the supposed crimes of their ancestors. As the Quran has declared, no soul shall bear the burden of another soul. Why should the Palestinians bear the weight of the world's crimes against the Jewish people, such that they have no right to their homeland, and they must be forcibly kicked off their homeland and forcibly made to flee by this genocidal ethno-state, humiliated like birds stuck in a cage? Palestinian resistance up and until armed force to such a genocidal ethno-state that constantly violates their rights and oppresses them is justified. And quite frankly, if the IDF or if Zionists can hide behind the language of nation states, of liberal democracy and secular ideology, despite all that they've done, despite all the things that they've committed, then these supposed standards of international law are a sham and are a scam fundamentally. However, unfortunately, the methods taken and the results thus far, well, they haven't exactly achieved much, to say the least. Not only have the various groups, whether they be the secular, nationalist, or Islamist groups, engaged at times in certain immoral and illegitimate methods which have led to the deaths of innocents and committed atrocities, they have ultimately failed to deliver genuine Palestinian liberation. Unfortunately, so it seems as if some of these or many of these groups have been funded or have been aided by the Israeli regime in one way or another. In any case, the very reason that some of these Islamist or more fundamentalist movements, let's say, the very reason that the Islamist factions have been rallied around was due to the failure of secular nationalist movements to provide solutions to the suffering of Palestinians, to provide genuine solutions of liberation and of various peace attempts, such as the Oslo Accords, which essentially amounted to humiliation rituals for the Palestinians. Perhaps these aren't particularly moral actors. In any case, they aren't particularly moral actors, but perhaps thinking merely in terms of morality is part of the problem and will not get us anywhere. Indeed, we may have to look beyond simply moral terms. And if, quite frankly, Zionists can hide behind these supposed standards of liberal democracy, of freedom, etc., etc., but then their actions just betray their true intentions and they commit heinous crimes anyways and atrocities without a care in the world, then why should Palestinians be bound to these supposed moral standards in any case? When did it all begin exactly? Did it begin 80 to 100 years ago? Maybe 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, or even before that? The biggest issues when engaging with Zionists is the inconsistent timeframes and decontextualization that they engage in. We have to constantly jump between secular ideological claims and ethno-religious claims from 3,000 years ago. Meanwhile, we decontextualize what the Palestinians have gone through and we decontextualize the actions of the Palestinians in light of that history of persecution and suffering. Within the current settlement, especially, the two-state solution may be an idealistic one, but in reality, all it has done is sown the seeds of further conflict for the past 80 or so years. In any case, it has failed to achieve any lasting peace. One may critique the one-state solution for the same inevitably idealistic perspective of reality as well. But in any case, how exactly would this conflict cease anyways? These different groups or these different peoples seem to have conflicting interpretations of how they should rule, how they should govern. And clearly, there is much persecution that is going on here. This is also based within the context of the Israeli state essentially being a Western proxy in a quote-unquote hostile sea of Arabism and Islamism. In any case, is anybody prepared to pay the price of what is to come? Because this can only realistically end in one of two ways. Beyond any idealistic solution, either the Israeli state establishes a complete hold over the region, such that no other power can threaten it in the region, and they continue to persecute and oppress their Palestinian subjects, and they continue to treat them with very harsh treatment. Or Israel ceases to exist entirely, and a one unified Palestinian state is formed. Thus, we would want a free Palestine where the natives of the land, whether Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, would have the right to determine their own destiny without a settler colonial project. Unfortunately, this may not prevent conflict between different groups within it, or indeed the various nations of the Arab or Muslim world, but it certainly would dissolve the settler colonial project that has systematically oppressed the Palestinians and which has been a source for the instability in the region for the past 80 years or so. Yet the cost to life, the suffering such an attempt will bring, all the life that shall be lost will be great. The sheer scale of human suffering would multiply tenfold. And this would make one hesitate naturally. The true cost of Palestinian liberation, and indeed of liberation of the broader Muslim and Arab worlds more broadly, will be quite huge, to say the least. Indeed, not just in the case of Palestinian liberation, whether it be from internal or external oppressors, whether it be from extremists or religious zealots or secular tyrants who want to socially engineer certain Muslim populations, it will be the case that the cost of attaining liberty will be truly great. Who is truly in the wrong here? Who really is the good guy or the bad guy in this story? Does that question really matter? For indeed, every single group of peoples has done things which are inexcusable and indeed wrong. Yet, this is true of humanity more broadly, and it cannot be reduced to just one group entirely. For some, Muslims or Islam has been a force of spiritual reformation and enlightenment, yet for others they accuse Muslims and Islam of bringing about a kind of dogmatic barbarism. For some, Jews or Judaism have been victims of persecution throughout their history, or for some, they have been perceived as a sinister minority who have conspired and schemed over the course of history. For some, the West, or Christians in the West, have been or have become the most successful or greatest civilization in history, or they have been an empire of evil, a life alienating force, via the establishment of modernity and spreading these modern values across much of the world.
そう唱える者もいる。この世に真実などない。それが現実だ。誰だって神でも悪魔にでもなれる。誰かがそれを真実だと言えばな。
The only truth about this world is that there is no absolute truth. Anybody can become a devil or a god. All it takes is for people to believe it, for it to be so. This is less of a statement denying or refuting the concept of absolute truth. Indeed, denying the existence of objective truth brings about its own paradoxes, but rather it's to point out the basic fact that these narratives, these historical projects that have been constructed over time are precisely that, these human projects. And whilst they have much good in them, they have much evil and much horrific things in them as well. And indeed, even for those of us who are Muslims or who adhere to the Islamic faith, it is no different. As Dr. Yasir Qadi points out, our religion may be divine, but our history is very much human. In other words, even if we are to say that our faith is revealed by God, the history of our faith and the projects that have developed around our faith have very much been human ones. Thus, there has been much tragedy and hope throughout our history, much good and evil, much sorrow and much joy. And this isn't just true of Muslims, this is true of every single group of peoples. Indeed, it is true of the human race as a whole. In any case, there is no point constantly thinking merely in terms of good and evil, or merely thinking in these intellectual terms, for it is not going to get us anywhere other than these abstract ways of thinking. Maybe Muslims aren't the good guys here. Indeed, maybe we might just be evil. But don't our innocent children deserve homes to return to free from fear of oppression, not to be humiliated, deprived of their liberty, whether it be Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Sudan, Libya, Syria? Don't our people deserve a free, independent civilization, free from internal and external oppressors, free from tyrants, whether extremists, religious or secular, or imperialists and foreign interventionists? Don't we too deserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Or will our nations be invaded and bombed into submission, with millions upon millions killed and internal tyrants and oppressors, whether secular or religious, kill and oppress their own, in the name of their supposed twisted versions of ideology or belief? Whilst these extremist groups run rampant, bombs from external powers are thrown at us. Whichever way you look at it, it is the people who are constantly suffering. When will we at last leave this age of crisis and conflict behind? When once more shall we stand united as one civilization with one fate in the face of such challenges? When will we reclaim our civilizational heritage and stand on our own? When will we not be intellectually subservient to others, nor merely dogmatic or blind followers? But finally, when will we chart out our own destiny, be the forgers of our own fate, and forge our own civilizational and intellectual path ahead? That is to say, up until now, for the past 100 years or so, our civilization has been in a state of perpetual decline. And not only that, but we have succumbed to these oppressive tyrannical forces. Our leaders are weak, pathetic leaders who have shunned their own people and their destiny for temporal pleasures, for their own prosperity at the cost of their own people. For example, how the Muslim leaders have abandoned their own people in Palestine, how they have abandoned them across most of the Muslim world, not just in Palestine, but also in places like Sudan, in places like Somalia, and have left them to rot and suffer. After all, a king who cannot protect his own people is no king. We have no choice but to strive for the sake of a free, liberated, one whole Palestine, for a free Sudan, Somalia, Congo, Iran, Syria, etc., etc., for a free, united civilization, free from all of its oppressors, external or internal. Not only has this civilizational weakness translated into the suffering of our own people, whether it be in Palestine or Iran or Syria or Somalia or Congo, but it has translated to our humiliation in front of the whole world. Increasing sentiments or narratives in much of the world, including in certain Western countries, have arisen regarding Muslims that clearly wish ill upon them, whether it be the narratives of mass deportations or more. In the United States recently, the Somali referee Umar Abdul Qadir Artan, the first Somali referee that was supposed to be a referee at the World Cup, was denied entry at Miami International Airport. Furthermore, certain teams were also detained and have been barred from entry even. Rising anti-Muslim sentiment in Western political discourse has led to tragic incidents where innocents have lost their lives. We see in Russia or China or in India even same things occurring. We must strive for our liberty thus against all oppressors, external or internal. Every generation has those who challenge the decadence and self-righteousness of the authority and hierarchy of their time. This is the price we must pay for our civilizational weakness and decadence, for our own inability, nay, for our complicity in the suffering of our brethren, the Palestinians, the Sudanese, the Somalians, the Syrians, the Iranians, and more. Indeed, in every generation there have been those who challenge the decadence and self-righteousness of the authority and hierarchy of their time. However, as per the cycles and great ironies of history and the human condition more broadly, there will be new forms of authority that will grow stagnant, decadent, and oppressive. Thus, every generation has its own battles. We must challenge the authority and oppression of our time, and it will be upon our descendants to do it again in their era once more.
सफ़े दहर से बातिल को मिटाया किसने? नौए इंसान को गुलामी से छुड़ाया किसने? मेरे काबे को जबीनों से बसाया किसने? मेरे कुरान को सीनों से लगाया किसने? थे तो आबा वो तुम्हारे ही, मगर तुम क्या हो? हाथ पर हाथ धरे मुंतज़िर फरदा हो। चश्मे अक़वाम ये नज़ारा अबद तक देखे, रिफ़त शान रफ़गना लक ज़िक्रक देखे। मर्दों में चश्मे ज़मीं यानी वो काली दुनिया, वो तुम्हारे शुहदा पालने वाली दुनिया, गर्मी महर की परवरदा हिलाली दुनिया, इश्क वाले जिसे कहते हैं बिलाली दुनिया, तपिश अंदोज़ है इस नाम से पारे की तरह, गौतज़न नूर में है आँख के तारे की तरह। अक्ल है तेरी सिपर, इश्क है शमशीर तेरी, मेरे दरवेश खिलाफत है जहांगीर तेरी। माँ सिव अल्लाह के लिए आग है तकबीर तेरी, तू मुसलमान हो तो तकदीर है तदबीर तेरी, कि मोहम्मद से वफा तूने तो हम तेरे हैं। ये जहां चीज है क्या, लौह कलम तेरे हैं।